I had arrived in London the final week of May 2017. By the final week of April 2018, I was cast adrift in the streets. 11 months was the fleeting length of time it took for a dream to descend into nightmare. 11 months for the inconceivable to become reality. 11 months to slide headlong into ruin. 11 short months. I was down. I was dirty. I was cold and damp. But I wasn't quite as out as Orwell had surmised. I knew from my own research mechanisms were in place to deal with exactly this type of situation, that my own ancestor had helped put the wheels in motion over 150 years ago. Perhaps Sir John himself would indirectly provide the salvation I needed from beyond the grave. It was the least he could do to show his appreciation for the years of work I had put into shining a light on his charitable labors, the same labors that would now rise up and save his wayward descendant. Even down and out, I was the same self-important middle-class twit I was before my fall. I contacted Crisis, Shelter, St. Mungo's, and other charities via email to explain my situation and ask what assistance they provided, particularly in relation to obtaining employment. Despite being on the streets, housing was not a concern as I had left on good terms with my former landlord and could easily return. I simply needed assistance finding work so I could pay the rent. Over the space of 2 weeks I sent dozens of emails. Not one charity responded. Eventually another rough sleeper recognized my plight and took me to the Salvation Army office on Princes Street. They in turn passed me on to The Connection, one of multiple charities dealing with homelessness under the auspices of St. Martin-in-the-Fields Church. Dutifully making the trek, I knocked on The Connection's big red door and was dutifully signed into their day center. Unfortunately, I could not stay in their night shelter without a referral from London's No Second Night Out initiative. It had taken 2 weeks and 2 separate charities to get noticed, and now I had another wait for what appeared to be an unnecessary piece of bureaucracy. A long and winding road indeed, but I considered myself lucky that my journey into homelessness was coming to an end after a comparatively short time. Except it didn't end. Despite the logical assumption their very name provides, I did endure a second night out. And a third. In fact, I spent almost 2 weeks of additional nights out at Marble Arch where I had gotten to know the local street cleaners on a first-name basis and was grateful for the cups of coffee and dinners they had started to bring. It took 8 attempts at contact before one of the No Second Night Out teams arrived. Even then, my deliverance was by happenstance more than planned design. The 2 outreach workers had arrived to pick up another rough sleeper who had shown up that very night and completely passed me by. Had I not taken the initiative to introduce myself, I can't help but wonder if I would still be sleeping at Marble Arch to this very day, receiving nourishment and sustenance from the generous low-income night workers of Westminster during those cold, occasionally rainy nights. In the meantime, I visited the day center at The Connection, lugging my rucksack and broken suitcase back and forth between Marble Arch and Trafalgar Square on a daily basis. It was worth the effort to take advantage of the showers, laundry service, and hot lunches that were provided. Initially, I was taken aback by the fees they charged for the meal. The night center provided dinner for free, but those making use of the day center had to pay to eat. A pittance admittedly, but when you're penniless even a pittance can be a luxury expense. Many 20-pence pieces were passed back and forth among the hungriest of the homeless. They helped compensate for the expense with free meal tickets that were distributed to volunteers and participants in various creative and self-help initiatives, or used as rewards for those exhibiting actions that pleased their caseworkers. These tickets, along with the even more valuable bus tokens, were frequently traded or sold for pennies as part of the bartering economy of the disenfranchised, and often added to the financial chaos that life on the streets brings. But beggars can't be choosers. They can only accept the charges and conditions forced upon them and make do the best they can, no matter how chaotic the results. Luckily, a good friend in Toronto had lent me a sum of money once I had signed on with The Connection, as we were both under the assumption that salvation was at hand. Under the conditions of my permanent residence status in Canada, I could only be out of the country for 2 years before that status expired, and I would have to reapply as a new immigrant. I still had slightly more than a year before I had to return, and we were both confident I would be thanking him in person before the year was complete. It wasn't to be. From day one I met with a rotating team of volunteers and social workers. I was assigned an official caseworker, who was promptly replaced by another, who was subsequently swapped for a third. I would later realize the caseworker designation is a bit of a red herring. Every conversation with any staff member or volunteer, even some fellow service users, is open to scrutiny, to interpretation, and to amateur diagnosis. Smoking areas especially are hotspots for cocked ears and mental note-taking. Your caseworker is merely the conductor. It creates an atmosphere of paranoia that keeps service users on their toes and on the defensive. The more battle-hardened rough sleepers learn to casually dole out different pieces of misinformation to different people to find out what comes back to them through their caseworkers. It throws the amateur psychologists off whatever scent they're pursuing and roots out the charity pets who, sometimes knowingly, sometimes not, are used to gather information on their fellow street mates. Lab rats can't fight back. People can. With naive trust, one recounted the story behind my circumstances many times to many people who dutifully took notes. I quickly picked up on the fact their side of the conversation was peppered with phrases like,
You can't say that.
Or,
What you mean to say is,
and they would make the necessary corrections for their files, without ever revealing the corrections or files to me. It was a pattern I noticed throughout my ordeal, not only in my conversations with the charities, but with the Department of Works and Pensions, the local councils, and, later, the Metropolitan Police. Over time I discovered my official files did not accurately record my statements, my situation, or my consent. They simply served to classify me according to tick boxes that did not necessarily reflect my situation or applied labels that definitely did not apply. I was not being heard, merely processed. In almost every interview and casual chat my tremors were addressed, understandably so. I have a vitamin deficiency, am perennially underweight, and my body fat percentage is often at risk of dropping to dangerously low levels. It is a physiology I inherited from Sir John Kirk himself. He managed to turn it to his advantage by becoming a celebrity spokesperson for phosphorine, an opium-based cure-all tonic that was all the rage in the early 20th century. I can barely remember to take my vitamin supplements when I can actually be bothered to purchase them, so won't be signing any endorsement contracts anytime soon. The condition is genetic, the apathy my own. One of the consequences is a slight tremor that becomes more pronounced during times of stress. It is often confused with alcohol withdrawal, so I wasn't particularly surprised when the charity workers expressed concern and gladly answered all the questions related to addiction, even the one that would later be used against me many times.
Is there a history of alcoholism in your family?
Yes. My mother was an alcoholic. Drink was a demon that plagued her for years. It was never a secret, never a scandal, never as destructive a force as I would encounter amongst the alcoholic friends I made on Trafalgar Square and the charity-approved housing I was later forced to accept. It was simply her cross to bear and a part of the fabric of life. She did eventually conquer it, as best as alcoholics can. With no proper support from family or friends that didn't fully understand the condition or its pain, and without seeking support from organizations that offer assistance, she made the not-so-simple decision to stop drinking. And she did. Through sheer willpower. Before she passed away from unrelated causes years later, she often said it was the hardest thing she had ever done. It was one of her proudest accomplishments, and one she was never afforded the credit she deserved. I was a smug, snotty, know-it-all 20-something at the time, and my response was invariably a bored "yeah, mum, whatever." It wasn't until I found myself homeless, befriended and looked after by the alcoholics whose disease had led them to the same destination that I gained a deeper appreciation of the suffering she endured and the strength it took to overcome it. They didn't just teach me the skills to survive, they taught me empathy, humanity, and the knowledge that you will never truly understand the suffering of another unless you share that same pain. Would I have gained that insight without them? Probably not. Sorry, Mum. That insight, however, was still months away. For now, I was simply providing the expert social workers with the information they required for my file so they could get the complete picture of the circumstances that led to my homelessness. It wasn't relevant in my opinion, but I did understand the concerns surrounding my tremors and happily answered all questions with complete honesty. They had my best interests at heart, so who was I to question them? Had I known how the information would be used against me, I would never have been so forthcoming. Besides, my main interest was finding the path that would lead me off the streets, not the path that led me there. I was more concerned with obtaining employment than housing, as I could easily return to my previous flat once I had a guaranteed income. My goal was to start working so I could pay the rent and start making payments on my credit card before my deadline to return to Canada expired. My caseworker explained the connection could only assist if I signed up for job seekers allowance. When I indicated it wasn't necessary to claim any benefits as a friend had loaned me some money, I was informed it was the only way the charity could help. This debate continued for a few days before I capitulated, voicing my concerns over how unnecessary it was. It was duly noted. Almost immediately, I was pressured to apply for housing benefits with the same unyielding admonition that I could not receive help unless I did. I again clarified I did not need assistance finding housing, as I could return to my former residence once I could guarantee the payment of rent that employment would provide. I was told I didn't understand the system, that it was too complicated to explain, and informed for the first time I had to learn to play the game. It was an impasse that went on for weeks. This pressure to sign on for benefits I did not need would continue throughout my charity experience, and eventually take a disturbing turn. While frustrating, the relationship was by no means fractious in those early days. I dove into their job search assistance program with gusto, updated my computer skills, participated in their book club and mindfulness sessions, always with an eye to obtaining a meal ticket or two, and successfully completed a health and safety training for food handling course they recommended. I did question the recommendation, as it was not in any way a natural extension of the skills I had built in journalism over the past 20 years. I was unofficially told it helps them keep their numbers up, and it was always advisable to show willingness on my part. It wasn't explicitly stated, but it was basically a "you scratch our back, we'll scratch yours" mentality common in the charity sector. Help the charity, and the charity will help you. Besides, the staff of the Connection were well aware of my existing skills and finding ways to use them within the organization. I was told of a multi-charity history club they felt would be a perfect fit, particularly in relation to my research relating to poverty and the history of the charity system. They were eager for me to use my knowledge of poverty in the Victorian era to show how effective the charities of today were in comparison to those of the past. I was open to the idea after I was back on my feet and earning a stable income, and even suggested it as a possibility for employment within a charity. The suggestion was met with polite, stone-faced smiles. Duly noted. I also engaged in some intriguing conversations with their impact and evidence coordinator, a lovely job title with a lovely salary, about nudge theory, a concept I remembered becoming vogue in the business community during my journalism days. It is a method of using positive reinforcement and indirect suggestions to influence human behavior. It had long been abandoned by reputable businesses for the very real ethical concerns surrounding psychological manipulation and the potential use of negative reinforcement. The concept had now surfaced in the charity industry and appeared to be embraced wholeheartedly. I smugly assumed it was pursued as a method to encourage donations from the general public. Over the following months, I realized its applications as a means to enforce charity-approved decisions or force people into making choices that were decidedly not in their best interest gave truth to the business community's ethical concerns. However, that insight too was yet to come. For now, it was simply a welcome intellectual conversation. A beacon of light soon appeared. I had been continuing my job search at the local library and had obtained temporary employment handing out an entertainment newspaper at various train stations in London on a weekly basis for the next month. I did have a slight hurdle to overcome. I could not easily traverse the city with my broken suitcase in tow. My activities were limited to Trafalgar Square from the closing of the day center at 1 o'clock to the opening of the night shelter at 9 o'clock. As many of the Connection's service users do, I spent those 8 hours listening to the buskers at Trafalgar Square, within sight of the red and white maple leaf flags that adorn the Canadian High Commission, a mere stone's throw away from the Connection. They were a daily, sometimes positive, sometimes painful, reminder of home, the home to which I still hope to return. The Connection does have lockers, but I was informed they were all in use. It is also possible to arrange to leave suitcases and belongings behind during the day based on criteria that are never clearly outlined and seemingly based on the mood and whim of the particular staff member you ask. I assumed taking paid employment would meet that criteria. Silly me. I asked again and received the default reply of too busy. I asked again, and received the same automated response, too busy. Finally, on my fourth request, I was granted permission, but for one afternoon only. I was informed it was taking advantage of their services and told how grateful I should be it was being allowed. Though taken aback by the rudeness, I chalked it up to that particular staff member having a bad day. I was too eager to get back to work, even if just for one day, to worry about it. Unencumbered by my homelessness and its literal baggage, I spent a glorious afternoon handing out newspapers at King's Cross train station. I felt productive again, happy again, human again, and I looked forward to completing the remaining assignments, confident my initiative and proven readiness to seek employment would fall on more understanding ears in the following week. And the money was more than welcome. Again, silly me. Not only was I denied permission, I was angrily informed I shouldn't be accepting paid work without their knowledge. I was accused of being secretive and not properly engaging with them. I was required to tell them everything if I wanted their help, and I was told accepting employment was not advisable as it would affect the job-seeking benefits I had, involuntarily, signed on for and prevent me from using their services. I argued that was not what I had been told when I first signed up and had made it very plain that finding employment was my main priority. I was subsequently told that was not true, that I had agreed finding housing should be my only concern. I received the first of dozens of accusations of being confused that would be thrown at me over the coming months and was again informed I needed to learn to play the game. It was my first taste of the random Jekyll and Hyde nature of the staff and volunteers of both the Connection and later, Passage House. I immediately filed a formal complaint with one of the managers who promised to investigate. The next day there was a clear-out. More than a quarter of the storage lockers suddenly became available. The people using them had not been in contact with the charity for months, in some cases over a year. The issue had simply been overlooked. They were presumably too busy to check the current whereabouts of their service users. I won the battle, but it proved a Pyrrhic victory, and I had made enemies in the process. I was finally provided a locker, but not in time to allow me to show up for the second session of newspaper distribution. I was terminated for being unreliable. My beacon of hope had been unceremoniously snuffed out. Shortly after, the manager of their employment, training and education section presented me with an internship opportunity in the communications department at John Lewis Department Stores. It was an opening I was keen to pursue, and I spent hours honing my CV and application form with an attention to style and detail I had not applied since my days as a business journalist. I was confident my background alone would see me granted an interview at the very least. My past duties and experience matched those required for the position line for line, and my references were glowing. My application was submitted via the Connection, and I was told they would inform me the minute they had a response. 2 weeks later I found out, by accident, my caseworker had turned the opportunity down on my behalf without consulting me. He did not feel it was in my best interest. When I confronted him, he admitted he didn't want me to find out because it would only upset me. When I asked why he felt it wasn't in my best interest, he didn't provide any answer, simply looked at me with a mild, stone-cold smile. I was getting so used to seeing these stone-cold smiles on a regular basis I was starting to recognize the different variations. 2 employment opportunities had now been lost as a result of the Connection's interference. Another, however, soon presented itself, and gave every indication the third time would prove the charm. The Orwell Foundation was sponsoring a theatrical reading of George Orwell's Down and Out in Paris and London to be live-streamed on the internet. Celebrities and homeless survivors were invited to read a chapter from the book, and a selection of service users from various charities in London were asked to write a brief 3-minute testimonial of their experiences to be read over the course of the event. I was one of the chosen. It wasn't paid work, but it was charity approved. Over the next 4 days I jotted down my tale the old-fashioned pen and paper way and copied them into electronic format on the computers at the Connection and the Westminster Library. I feared going over the allotted 3 minutes, but magnanimously informed the director she had the freedom to make any cuts she saw fit. I was not going to allow my verbosity to get in the way of art. My verbosity had other ideas, however, and I surpassed the time limit with my testimony clocking in at a whopping 10 minutes. Ego. Art. It's a fine line. Show day arrived. A who's who of English celebrities participated in the readings. I confess I didn't recognize many, but my ingrained Canadian politeness allowed me to gaze at them with the same starstruck awe reserved for those few I did. The production was engrossing, the cast and audience one of the friendliest you could encounter, and my overlong scribblings were performed as the finale and censored and uncut. The cast infused my words with more strength, more power, and more drama than I could ever hope to inspire. It was a hell of a performance. To top it all off, my testimony had been published online by the Huffington Post the same day it was performed, accessible for all the world to see. It would be translated into French and performed in Paris later that year. A derelict diva was born. I began scribbling notes for future literary, theatrical, possibly cinematic endeavors, and dreaming of the Emmys, Oscars, Tonys, BAFTAs, and Pulitzer prizes that would adorn my mantle. Blissfully forgetting, of course, I was homeless and didn't even possess the proverbial pot to piss in, let alone a mantle. Nevertheless, I left the theater confident my luck was changing for the better. Luck, it turned out, was waiting in the wings, twirling its handlebar mustache, and snickering at my misplaced optimism. This was but an intermission. The next act had more drama to reveal.